And just 1 second for it to be fully live on Facebook. And we're good. Hi, welcome to our next episode of Wise Warrior Conversation Podcasts. I have my wonderful friend Danielle on. She and I worked together at Toshiba, and you were definitely one of those people that kind of like restored my faith in corporate America and like how to combine the spiritual with like being a badass, like strong businesswoman. So if you can take a moment, Danielle, to introduce yourself and share a little bit about yourself.
Okay, my name's Danielle Campbell. I 54 years old. It's a good thing. Married to wonderful grown boys, very proud of them both. I had worked in media sales as a salesperson and a sales manager pretty much since the day that I graduated college, so for a little bit more than 25 years. And about 2.5 years ago, I had decided that, you know what, I was kind of bored with the industry and didn't really see where I wanted to go with it, and decided to not necessarily make a career change, but make an industry change. So I went the complete opposite direction and ended up at Toshiba in tech space, which was something very, very new for me. So it was exciting that I was able to learn a new industry, but bring the skill set that I had to help, hire and train new salespeople to bring them up so that they can help grow in their careers as they went.
Yep. And one of the things I loved about you was like, I had you on a lot of like our lunch and learns for the women's networking group, and like you taught things around negotiation, which like I think for women, like we're not really taught how to negotiate.
No.
And when we try to negotiate like men, we're perceived as bitches or, like we're wanting something, even though we're doing the same thing as men. And so, like, it was wonderful to have you and Duffy and Ashley, like, to have two strong women, like, really talk about, like, how as women do we negotiate? How do we, be a voice and an advocate for ourselves, which I think is kind of like, part of like breaking that glass ceiling on, women's careers.
Very much so. And, it's interesting as I was going through my career, I had started my career in the early 90s, early to mid 90s. And, not that there's not still a lot of sexual harassment in the workplace, because there is, like, it just is, but it was so much worse back then. And, I didn't realize as I was growing my career how many times I broke that glass ceiling. But by doing that, you're right. The standards, they would say men were aggressive. They would say men were, got the job done. They would say all these positive things about men doing the exact same thing that I was doing, but, I was nasty to deal with, or, why can't she be more pleasant? I actually had a manager tell me during a budget meeting, why can't she smile more? When
Wow.
we're talking about numbers, we're talking about budgets. And I was like, why do I need to smile at a budget meeting? You would never say that to a man. And so it's just, it's hard to hear that constant negativity, but stick to your moral compass to say, no, I'm not going to let you treat me like that. And it's not even saying that you're not going to let him treat you like that. It's more that your opinion of me is irrelevant.
Mhm.
And I think that that's more important, is that we as women are raised to be people pleasers.
Yes.
And, we want everybody to like us, and we want to keep the peace, and, we want all things wonderful. And that's just that doesn't work in
Mhm.
the world of business. It just doesn't.
And it doesn't work in the world of life.
It really, really doesn't. And, I think a lot of it for me has to do with age. I think that the older you get, the less you care what people think about you. And I think that that's really, really important. But I also had believe it or not, a couple of male mentors who were like, "Are you going to take that?"
Mhm.
And it's like, "No, no, I'm not going to take that." And and so they were supportive in my ability to stand up for myself and say, "No, this is unacceptable behavior and I won't take it."
And I love, um, I love this story. Like your salary negotiation, I think it was at NBC. Um, I just think that was like, I was in awe of you at that moment. I
My
don't.
husband loves that story. So I had been working as a salesperson for a cable company, and the gentleman that I did negotiations with, it was actually his wife's gym. And he was in broadcast sales and he was a manager in broadcast television. And the only day he could meet with me was Saturday mornings. And so Saturday mornings, I bundled up my newborn, which was my oldest son at the time, and we went to this person's gym to go talk business. So the wife took the baby and off she went because she got snuggle times. And so I was able to go back and forth and negotiate terms for this contract I was working on. So I decided that I wanted to get into management. I decided I wanted to go into broadcast TV, and they had an opening. And I had lunch with this gentleman who was the gentleman in charge of hiring. He literally took a napkin, wrote a number on it, slid it across the table, and said, "Does this work?" And I had the job. And, you know, my husband calls it my mafia moment because that's kind of what it was. It was just so weird. But, he had the power to do that. And I had made enough of an impression that I would go above and beyond to get the job done, to push back on his negotiation when he was trying to get things out of me that I wasn't willing to give on the contracts, that he knew that I could take it. And that made all the difference.
Yep. And then you put your number and slid it back.
Well, his number was actually really, really good, so I wasn't gonna. I was like, "All right, I'm gonna talk to my husband, but probably I'm gonna take this." So
But it's like such a like what you see on TV kind of thing.
it really was. It was most of a bizarre experience as we were having sushi. So
What is your advice like for especially like from the spirituality perspective? Because I think and I know like for you it was with your son, for me it was like my own health crisis. Like it's a lot of people have like their awakening when there's this health crisis, that it's like your way of being no longer works,
hmm
and you have to like kind of awaken and change and grow and expand. So like talk a little bit first about like your experience with that, and like bringing in this new level of spirituality into the work that you do. And then I would love if you could give advice to people who like are starting on their career path or even like their own business path, like how as women, how can we balance this, our spirituality with, our strength, uh,
hmm
and our like not playing the good girl. Like how do we balance those things, and what is your advice?
Yeah. And it's really hard as women because we tend to take the caretaker role in everything, whether we're asked to or not. We automatically take that role because we feel that no one can do it better. And they're usually right. No one can do it better, but that doesn't mean we should take the role on. So we had moved to Raleigh, North Carolina for me for a promotion because I was dead set on a certain level. I wanted to be a general manager of my own television station, and I was aggressively pursuing that. And it didn't work out the way I had planned. And then all of a sudden, I had gotten a call from another TV station here in the area. It was the third time they had offered me a job. And I'm a big believer, sometimes God puts you where he wants you.
Mhm.
And 2 months after I took that job, my oldest son, got very, very sick and was very sick for about 2 years. And so it was earth-shattering. You're at the doctor 3 days a week, you're at therapy, you're just, you're doing everything you can to get through this ordeal with your family while still trying to work full time. And by the end of the experience, when he was starting to do well and he was starting to thrive again, I was just there was just nothing left. I just was I don't know if I would even call it a depression, but I'm sure some of it was. It was just I was burned out and I just didn't have anything to give anyone anymore. And I just could not do anything. So I usually would take a vacation by myself for a couple of days every year. I'd go down to the beach. But this year, this particular year, I decided to do something different. I wanted to go to a spa. And I found this spa out in Boone. And it was in an Ayurvedic spa, which I didn't even know what that was. I was just looking at the spa services. I didn't care about anything else. And it was a life-altering experience for me because 4 days at this spa where I did yoga and ate better food and did meditation and on the whole 9 yards, as well as the spa treatments, I came back feeling the best that I had felt in years. And I had realized that part of my problem was I had my work and my kids, and I really didn't have anything else. And I knew that I needed to change because, in the next few years, I wasn't going to have my kids anymore because they were going to go to college, they were going to do their thing, and it was just going to be my husband and I knew I needed more. And I went on to meet up to look for some groups that had similar interests, and I did find a group that was very, very into, we call it woo woo, because it means a lot of different things for a lot of different people, and that's when I got into crystals and that's when I got into meditation and just started doing more of a self-care journey for me. I talk all the time about finding my chi. And that it's very hard to maintain that when you're in the corporate environment and you're trying to break that glass ceiling while still managing to try and be a people pleaser and take care of your kids and your husband. So I think, the biggest thing for me was I had a life coach who gave me a sheet that said, okay, list 50 things that you like to do. And I could not come up with more than 12.
Oh, wow.
It was really sad that I just couldn't think of more than 12. And she had said that you need to spend 1 hour a day doing one of these things because I wasn't.
Mhm.
I was working, I was taking care of my house, I was always doing chores. I was never doing anything that was just taking care of myself. And I think that that also changed that journey for me to say, okay, you know what? I don't need to sit around and watch TV with my husband all the time because I don't care about TV. I don't even really like it. I was just doing it to be with him. I can go do something for myself that's more important, that I feel more refreshed than taking on that added responsibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the hardest thing for corporate with trying to balance that, you said balance that corporate culture with who you are on your journey is just to have that constant reminder. We as women tend to be exceptionally organized, which is a wonderful thing. And, sometimes that organization can stress us out, but sometimes that organization can make all the difference. And we tend to not pencil in our calendar things that we do that we need to do for ourselves. So I literally had time every day on my calendar because if it wasn't on my calendar, it didn't happen. I had time on my calendar to make sure that I did certain things, whether that was I came into the office a half hour early and did a meditation, or, made sure that I had dinner once a week with a girlfriend so that I got out of the house to take care of my soul spiritually that way. But I made sure that I had certain things on my calendar to keep me organized, to keep me from getting to that level of burnout where it was just all work all the time and everything else was an afterthought.
Right. I also found for myself that like taking that drive into work to be meditative as well, um, and really like connect with God, and just kind of be in that energy through that. I think my drive was like 20 to 30 minutes,
Mhm.
and just really like anchoring in that that start to my day with that connection. Because it's like you're stuck in the car on your commute, for that time. So like, I think a lot of times we think, oh, like, I've got to sit and do nothing in meditation. But like Tai Chi is a moving meditation.
Mhm.
Like there's ways of, even when you're busy and you don't think that you have the time for that, like find those times, even like while you're in the shower, you can be meditative while you're drying off after the shower. Like you can build in those moments of meditation into your day.
Right. And we tend not to do that, and because it's easy to brush it off and say, "Oh, I'll do it later."
Mhm.
Which is why it's so important to plan it as part of your day. I have found that if I don't do it in first thing in the morning, it doesn't happen because I get busy with work, I get busy with home, whatever. Um, and my husband likes to make fun of me because, everybody has their Spotify or their music services, but my lists are based on emotions.
Mhm.
So, if I'm upset and I'm angry and I want to utilize that anger, I have my angry playlist. But if I'm upset and I'm angry and I need to calm down before I get home, I have my classical music playlist, my what I call my peace playlist, to just, take down those anger levels. And the opposite is true if I need to be pumped up or whatever the situation might be, because like you said, it's not necessarily meditative, but for me, music is very important to my life, and it can change my mood to where I'm a more pleasant person to deal with, whether that's either making me more happy or to calm me down if I'm upset, whatever the case might be. That's my meditative time, because then I generally have 45 minutes to an hour on a commute based on where I live. So, it makes it a lot easier.
And I think you made a good point of even like because I think as women, the like our anger, like you shouldn't be angry, but women, like we need to harness the rage that's there, and not to do violence, but to like either move us to action, or even to like because it's powerful. It's like it is the fire, the wave, the ocean. Like it's a way to access our inner power, and it's okay for us to experience that rage. I mean, because we are still dealing with some level of um, either harassment, sexual, or otherwise, or even just this like, you're a woman, you should be seen, not heard, kind of,
Dismissive.
that we have to be able to tap into that power and say, no, I deserve to be here in this moment, in this space with you, and to hold my own.
I am a firm believer that I have been as successful as I have been in life because I was pissed.
Mhm.
I had a very challenging youth, and I was angry about that. And I funneled that anger into things that were going to make me more successful, whether that was, working hard so I could pay my way through college, whether it was, my first job out of college, which was just, it was a great job and I learned a lot, but the environment was toxic for women. I was angry. And so by funneling and focusing that anger, to achieve more, to do more, that is what helped me break that glass ceiling, because it was like exactly what you said. No, I do belong here. I'm smarter than you are. I definitely work harder than you do. I am going this is my turf. And it was that anger that helped me get there. Now, whether that's healthy, I don't know, but it worked for me. And so I think that you have to find what works for you to help you get to what you want to accomplish.
And I think like there's a lot of people like in my group and stuff like who've had challenging childhoods, and it's you know like you can either allow that to define who you are and be in that the story and the victimhood and like stay stuck in that energy, or you can harness that power of I am going to rise above that, and
Right.
I am going to create the life that I actually deserve, and again harness that power. I think that's so important, and that's like what I really believe is about accessing our inner authority, and and using that to create what we want to, have the life that we desire.
We all have energy vibrations. We as women have them higher than anybody else. So it's like, what do you want those energy vibrations to be focused on? When I was younger, I was focused on, I do not want to be my mother. What can I do for my life so that I never end up like my mother? And that's what pushed me to go to college. That's what pushed me to go into the corporate world, is that was just totally what I wanted, was to be nothing like her. Obviously, as I've gotten older, that's changed, and now that I've at this stage of my career, my energy vibrations are focused more on how can I help the next generation. When I see new salespeople coming into whatever environment I am, how can I help them achieve their goals? How can I help them get to their next best level? So it's a different kind of focus, a different focus on those energy vibrations that we have.
Yep, I love that. I was even thinking like earlier today, and I remember, like I think it was like the first International Women's Day. I don't know if you were with the company yet or not, but I remember like Joy and some of the other women, talking about how men would tell them to like if they got emotional to like making their emotions bad and wrong,
Hmm.
and like don't cry, or like don't be so dramatic, or like all this derogatory stuff, because like the men couldn't handle the level of their emotions. But yet like like our empathy and all these things, the woo woo stuff that is actually, it makes us really good leaders and managers to be able to like feel and understand like what the people in our group is going through. And again, this applies whether you're in corporate or your own business, like to understand like clients and everything, and be able to just intuitively know what needs to be done, what needs to be said. But men would make us bad and wrong, and it's like, oh, you're weak and whatnot.
Right.
But like when they talk about it as emotional intelligence, all of a sudden, it's the cool thing for men to have this emotional intelligence. And it's like, so everything that you've made women bad and wrong for, if you put this label on it, it's okay.
It's okay. I always said, like, I've had clients, when I was in sales, I always used to tell people, you never know what happened before you walked in the door. Okay. So you always have to give someone a bit of grace. They could have gotten a phone call that was bad news. They could have had to fire someone. You don't know what happened before you walked in the door. And so, we as a women can immediately read the situation and say, okay, maybe we need to not have this conversation right now. Maybe we need to have this conversation later. And when I've been in that situation and things have happened like that, the customer is always more grateful that I did that, rather than to push my agenda, which most men would, to say, well, we're here for a sales call. I'm having my sales call. I would rather say, you know what? Maybe now's not the time. Let's reschedule. We'll do this another time. I'll give you a call. And they're appreciative of that. And that is that empathy that we're talking about. My philosophy is, as a manager, is I have my kids at home and my kids at work, and I treat them the same. Sometimes they need, a good smacking around. And sometimes they need a shoulder to cry on. They need somebody to listen, which is, when I hire someone, the first day they're in my office, I say, this is the cone of silence. You can come in this door and shut this door and say anything you want. You can cry, you can swear, you can be angry. You can get those emotions out in this office and then go back to what it is you need to do. You need to be able to have that safe space to be able to do that. Men would not create that safe space for their employees. They just don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
When you offer them that safety net and allow them to have that place where they can just fail, without having to worry about being burdened about failing, they are more productive and more loyal to you and will stay longer with you just because you have that relationship with them.
Yep. I remember I had just kind of stepped into a leadership role when I was at IBM, and like I had all of the work that I had previously had, which was a lot. I had all the documentation that my previous team lead had been doing, plus learning how to like run all these builds, to lead, to do all this stuff. Like everybody else around me knew how stressed I was. But my male manager, I mean, and he was a good guy, but like, it wasn't until I broke down in tears in front of him about how stressed I was, did he offer to get help, to like bring somebody else in to take some of the burden off of my plate.
Hmm.
And it's like if I had had a woman boss who like was open to like feeling what I was experiencing and either like would have gotten me help without having me break down or could have like talked me through, helped me in any way, like that would have been such a different experience. And so like that was, my big thing when I stepped into leadership, and like I could feel when the people on my team, like they didn't agree with something, or there was something that they had an issue with. Like I would monitor even like what their workloads were, so that like if somebody had a lot and somebody had a little, like they could help each other, and that would be for a period of time it might be this person helping, which is a growth opportunity, and then like there'll be a time when that person needs help, um and so like you said, like it created that safe space where they knew that I already knew. Um, and by the end of my time there, they'd be like, "All right, I know that you already know, that I'm upset, so let's go talk." And it's
Yeah,
like,
right.
"Yep." And so like it created it does create that loyalty. I think my team at that time, they were the most innovative they've ever been, and we didn't wait for permission. Like in fact, like there were times where like the guy who was our manager, he was like, "Oh, like now's not the time to have that discussion." And I was like, "No, now's the time to have that discussion.
Right.
If we wait until when he's saying that we should ask, we're still too late." And so like every time that I pushed my team, like, let go talk to this guy now, it was always like, "Oh, wow, like, yeah, we need to do that." And they would swivel everything and make it happen. So like, I think that's also important for women in corporate, in business, like, and I need this advice for myself of like, don't wait for permission. Don't wait for somebody to see you. Don't wait until somebody tells you it's the right time. Like if you
Right.
know now's the right time, like do it.
It's better to ask forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Which
It's
is
one of the first things I learned in sales.
which is also the way to break the glass ceiling.
It is. Just go ahead and do it. Because, if you do it and they're successful, they're going to be like, "Yay!" And if you do it and you're not successful, they're going to be like, shame, shame on you. Which, okay, whatever, and that's just the thing. You have to get to a space, and it's very hard to do. I don't want to say that it's not, because it's exceptionally hard to do, but you need to get to a place where you say to yourself, okay, whose opinion do I really value and whose opinion do I really not care about? You know, we have to look at people as how consequential are you to my life and my success? And, is your opinion of me going to make a difference in my work?
Right.
And sometimes that might be your boss's boss or your boss or whatever. And it's like sometimes you just have to say, you're not going to get in my way. you know I always look, I use this example with sales a lot. Sometimes sales, you run up to a brick wall. Okay, so how are you going to get it under it? You're going to go under it, you're going to go over it, you're going to around it. There is always a way to get through the brick wall,
Mhm.
even if you can't go directly through it. And you have to look at people that way too. People can be obstacles in your life. How are you going to get around the obstacle that's in your life, no matter who that person might be?
Yep. And I think that's so important, and especially for men and women who are on this spiritual path, because a lot of times, I see a lot with, people in my sphere of like, oh, there was this interference. I couldn't, get on Zoom, or I couldn't, do this thing because something was interfering. And it's like you just gave your power away to something, even if it is like true that some energy is interfering and trying to stop you. Like that is the sign that like you do not let that thing stop you.
Right.
You either reset everything, or if this path doesn't work, there's another path, there's another path, there's something that like those things can only control so many things. But if like there's another thing, there's another way, like I am going to do this thing, and I will find that path. I will find the person who will listen. I will find the device that works. Whatever it takes, I am doing this, versus, oh, like it must be a sign that I'm not meant to do this.
Yeah.
No, it's the very sign that you do this.
I mean, I think that's the most important thing that we as women need to pay attention to is that attitude of never quit.
Mhm.
There's a famous poem called "Don't Quit" that I have in multiple places. I always have a copy at work. I always have a copy at my office at home because there will be days when all you want to do is quit. And you have to remind yourself of all the reasons you shouldn't. And I think that that is what determines your path of happiness. Because if you quit, you will never be happy.
Mhm.
And you have to pursue what it is that you think that you want in order to determine how that path is going to make you happy. And like you said, taking different paths to get to a goal, sometimes one of those paths, when you couldn't get through one way and you take another way, is actually a better way.
Mhm.
But you
Exactly.
don't know if you quit. And I think that is the thing that we as women need to get better at is to say, I am not going to quit. I am not going to give up. There's got to be a better way. Let's find the other way.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, I think like we can also push ourselves to like such a degree that we burn ourselves out. So like where do you think is that um those moments where it's like you actually need to rest, you're not quitting, you're resting.
Time
And
out.
yeah, and giving yourself that moment, um, versus the energy of quitting. Like, how do you navigate that, and like how do you even help like your employees through those moments?
I think that when you're reaching a point where you're trying to accomplish goal and you just feel like you're beating your head against the wall, you need to take a time out. And I like to be, like I said, I'm very organized and very logical. And when I take a time out, I will sit down with a pad of paper and say, okay, what is the problem? What is the solution I want to take? What have I done? What have I done? And what have I not done? And sometimes we have to decide when I say don't quit, but sometimes we have to decide, sometimes there are things we should quit. And I think that that's a very hard lesson too. In sales, we talk a lot about, firing customers. Sometimes you need to fire a customer because they're just not worth it. So if you're beating your head in and you're on something and you're just feeling just more and more disheartened and you're struggling and you get to a point to say, is it worth it? Then you need to sit down and take a time out with yourself and actually write it out. And say, is it worth it? Or if I'm trying to accomplish this, but I'm struggling with it and not sure if it's worth it, is there something else that might be better? you know you have to decide what it is you're trying to accomplish and the why. I think the why is more important than anything else, because if you're accomplishing it and you're trying to accomplish it and you don't have a good why,
Mhm.
or if you're trying to accomplish it and you're not succeeding but you have a good why, well, what are other ways to get what you want with that why? But if you don't do that timeout you're not going to go. You're just going to continue to hit your head into the wall trying to figure out the best path. You need to strategize it, just like you need to strategize any kind of business deal. You don't go out and just do something in business with no plan. And I think that's the mistake that, a lot of people make in their lives is they try to accomplish something without a plan. And that's what the timeout is for. The timeout is to reevaluate the plan, to help, put together the strategy to accomplish the goal. If we're not doing that, we're not learning.
Right.
And I think that, that is something that's so important. Sometimes we can get just so focused, on the accomplishment, but not how we're going to get there or why we're going to get there, that we lose sight of everything else.
Yeah.
And that's what that timeout is for, is to say, okay, what am I really trying to accomplish? Why am I trying to go accomplish it? And what are some of the other ways we can do it? So when you start having that feeling of just, ugh, yeah, I have no other words, ugh, I mean, you get those feelings of just almost desperation. It's like, okay, stop, time out. Why are we doing this?
And my friend Kristen says giving yourself permission to quit is such a breakthrough.
It really, really is, because sometimes you have to stop one path to take another. Doesn't mean you're losing sight of your goal. Okay, you still have that goal, but you have to figure out a different way to get there. And that goes back to what we were talking about previously, is what are the different paths we can take, and not to quit necessarily on the goal, but maybe we need to take a time out and re-strategize how we're going to accomplish it.
Yep. And I always would tell people, especially because sometimes it's like, you spend all this time trying to solve this problem that you no longer can see straight, and you end up, you either waste more time trying to figure it out, or you start making mistakes because you're burnt out, you're tired, you're frustrated. And I would always tell people, you know if it was early in the morning, just go take a long lunch,
Mm-hmm.
step away from your computer, step away from everything. Or if it was close to the end of the day, just leave early, go do something fun, go do something with your family, and just step away from it and forget all about it. And I was like, and I guarantee you, when you come back, the solution will be there.
Right.
And it never fails. It's always there.
And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about self-care.
Mhm.
Because if you're stressed out and struggling at work, and then you come home and you don't take that break, and breaks don't include chores or doing something that you really aren't interested in. A break is actually doing something for self-care, no matter what that is for you. Because, like I said, she had me write 50 and I couldn't, but that doesn't mean I do the same thing every day. So, taking that time for self-care every day, you know, makes all the difference, because it allows your brain to just kind of clear, so that you're able to address creativity. That we need that fresh space in our brains to be creative, especially we as women do. And if it's clogged up with just everything else and we're not taking that time out for ourselves, for self-care, we're never going to get it.
And our brains are always, it's still working on a problem. That's why, the heart brain connection, it's we need to lead from our heart, and we need to direct our mind to solve problems.
Right.
And it's always going to solve the problem whether we're focused on it or not. And that's why a lot of times it's after you've been working on a problem at work all day or in your business, and then the next morning you're in the shower, and all of a sudden it's oh,
Exactly.
I know exactly what I need to do.
Exactly. Exactly. And sometimes you, like you said, if you're working on a project and you're just getting frustrated, put it down. Just put it down. And we don't give ourselves permission to do that. We feel like we have to constantly work at it until we get it right. And that doesn't work. All it does is frustrate you more. All you're doing is banging your head against the wall. Put it down, get up, go do something else, like you had said, and then start again,
Yeah.
and you'll do it.
And I think as managers, And especially like as women are like, the men who want to be emotionally intelligent, like you need to give your people permission of like, no, step away, go have a long lunch, go home early, just like come back tomorrow refreshed.
Exactly.
We need to give our people permission to do that. And I think, you know, I've experienced this and in, a lot of my corporate life, like, especially with this agile approach to software development and things like that, where it's like this constant, do. Um, and we aren't giving our people that time away, that time to like recharge themselves.
Right.
Because like the project managers are like, no, we need to get this, we need to do all this other stuff. Like, oh my God, we have to have, it's like, no, we really don't. Like, if you don't take care of your people, you're not going to have the money, you're not going to have the innovation, you're not going to have the successful products if you keep burning your people out.
Right. And that is a distinctly American problem. I had several years ago, I was like really, really, really struggling with burnout. It was bad. And I was just doing a lot of research about burnout and how can I get over this because I need to re-engage with my life, all that good stuff. And I came across a German study that they had done. I don't know, don't ask me. Google is weird. You go down the rabbit hole. But I read this study that Germany had done talking about burnout and how their people got out of burnout. And really, the biggest thing for them with burnout is taking time off.
Mhm.
They actually will give people a month off of work to get over burnout.
Yep.
Americans, we can't even get 2 weeks off in a row without a fight from our company,
Yep.
and so that's a huge thing is that we as Americans need to take more time off to not only refresh our brains, but refresh our spirits, refresh our bodies. If we're not taking the time off that we're given, we're missing something,
Mhm.
you know.
Yep. Even if you love your job and or love your business or love whatever it is that you're doing and you're passionate about it and you're excited about it, you still need to take breaks away from it so that you can continue to love it and love what you're doing.
Exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
and build our lives to, how do we get the most from our time so that we still have time for ourselves. Because I mean, I remember like at IBM, like I mean, it was nothing to work like 60 plus hours a week, and it'd be nothing, when you look at it like from a salary perspective, like your really good salary becomes like pennies,
Yeah.
and it's really not that great because you're working all these hours. Like when I started at Toshiba, or when I applied, it was supposed to be a contract job, and they offered me like a permanent job, and I cried because all I could think about was like, I'm going to be working 60 hours a week, and I don't want to do that. Like
Right.
I like that just like I just collapsed, and like the recruiter that was on the phone with me, she was like, "Isn't that a good thing?"
Yeah, sometimes not. I think the hard thing for us is, we talked earlier about saying no, and it's the same philosophy is that, they might want 60 hours a week of you out of you, but that's killing you.
Yeah.
And especially women, because we talk a lot about, women don't just work that 60-hour week at work. We bring work home with us, then we do all the housework and we take care of the kids and everything else. And I remember when that my kids were younger, it was a full-time job just taking them to sporting practices after work,
Yeah.
because you were always running, you were always cooking, and then you were working on weekends because you're still going to sporting practices. And then you had to sneak in all the chores that needed to be done. It was challenging.
Mhm.
So, that kind of goes back to the negotiations when we first started this conversation is you have to negotiate that no, I'm not going to work 60 hours a week. You're paying me for 40, I'm working 40. That doesn't mean occasionally I won't work 50, but you have to determine what your limits are so that you can function as
Yep.
a person rather than burn out.
Yep. and even, to like, okay, if I need to work that extra, or when I need to work that extra, like, how can I take the financial gain and, like maybe I hire somebody to come clean my house. Maybe, I hire somebody to come cook my meals, or like, certain things where it's like, it's one thing like if you love doing those things, but like, if it's like a chore and something else that I have to do, like, how can you offset some of that,
Mhm.
so that like you can be focused on the things that are really important, like your kids, like if you're having to work both like your corporate job and build your business, like that you have the time for those things. Like how do you do it strategically, to make the most of your time?
Exactly. Exactly. And fortunately, we as women are better at it than men are. So, but we need to remind ourselves that we are not superwomen, nor should we be. And that's the stereotype that I think we need to break, is that we have it all together and can handle it all. We don't need to handle it all.
Yeah.
And we need to get better at that.
And even like, it always surprises me, like, my female friends who are married with kids, and, the husband is babysitting. It's like, no, that's your kid, and you're taking care of your kid. You're not babysitting. Like,
Exactly.
and they allow their husbands to get away with that mentality of like, well, if you're going to be the babysitter, then like, you may not be the person I continue to have in my life, because I want a partner who is there and, raising our kids together.
Well, and a lot of times this was a hard lesson for me to learn. And I had once again, I had a great mentor. I'm big on mentors, not just for work, but for life. But, you know, when I first got married, I was really struggling with what my role should be as a wife. I had this preconceived notion of what I should be. But the fact of the matter is, my husband never asked that of me. I just thought it was something I was supposed to be. And, changing that mindset of what we think we're supposed to be compared to what people are actually asking of us is
Mm,
very hard to do. We, particularly as mothers, feel like that we should, not only take over, childcare, but we feel like we should take over, developing their minds, their bodies, their just everything. And, imposing on other people to do that feels wrong.
mm,
It's not, but that's not necessarily because other people are putting that thought in our head. We've put that thought in our head and we need to stop it. But we learn it from other women who have done the same thing. And it's almost like talking about generational trauma.
mm.
That is a generational thing that we have learned somewhere else, and we need to stop it. you know Nobody told me to take on those responsibilities for everything that was going on in my house. I just felt it was my responsibility. It wasn't. And my husband never asked me to. My husband was waiting for me to tell him what to do. you know, but until we figured that out, I was taking all of that on myself and struggling with everything. And I was unhappy. And, it caused friction in the home. And, but it was having that conversation of him saying, I didn't ask that. I, I didn't want that, so we need to stop taking those responsibilities on for ourselves without having conversations with our partners on, okay, let's talk about how we're going to actually handle this.
And I think that also goes to like your job, like what is really being expected of you. Like, you know, um, are you taking on things that are kind of beneath you and distracting you from the actual work that you should be doing?
Right.
Is going to advance your career, that like could be, those could be things that would move somebody else's career who's like new, like taking on some of those things would be beneficial to them and free you up to do the things that bring in money for yourself, your business, or the corporate job. Like, looking at all those things and having a conversation with your manager. And if like that manager, isn't willing to work through that with you, I think even going above their head and like, what exactly, do you want me to be doing this job that's going to bring the company money, or do you want me doing these little things that, are nice to have, but don't actually move the company forward?
Right. Agreed. Yeah, completely agree on that.
Yeah. And I think, that's where I think it's so important for both men and women, but I think, particularly women, because we're two women, like we have to do that deep healing work. We have to like, what is our generational trauma? What are the stories? Where are our shadows? What are the past life things that we're still dealing with today? That like once we can face them and clear them and heal them, opens up new possibilities, new ways of being.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that's where it's like it's so important to bring spirituality and healing into your our corporate worlds, our business world, whether it's like, we are the CEOs of a business or, working for somebody else, the more that we heal ourselves, the better off we'll be. And I think the more successful companies will be.
agreed. And a lot of times, things that need to be healed are distractors. So when you're talking about working in the corporate environment or own your own business, anything that distracts you from focusing on that, that will stop any kind of progress, particularly when those traumas or areas stop you from pushing forward. Because you feel like you can't do it, you feel like you can't deserve it, whatever the issue might be, those issues that you have yourself, you really need to take a good look at and figure out how you're going to heal and move past them so that you can say, you know what, I do deserve that and I'm going to go get it. But if you don't have that confidence, which, for a lot of women, especially women who have had some sort of trauma in their past, we feel like we don't
Mhm.
not good enough because we've been told a lot that we're not good enough,
Yeah.
and so we have to say to ourselves that yes, we are. And then when we can do that, then we have to say to the other women that we know that yes, you are.
Yeah.
Because if we as women hear it from enough people, we will start to believe it.
Amen. Amen. Um, so if people want to connect with you, how can they connect with you? Especially, because I think it, like, I'm grateful to have you in my life. To have like those powerful women who, are breaking the glass ceiling, who are doing the healing work, who, are opening the possibility. Because I think, I truly believe that um, basically all of the systems in the world, and particularly in this case, like, the corporate environment needs to change,
Mm,
and some of it is gonna, I think there's gonna be companies that, as people heal, as people evolve, there's going to be corporations that are going to disintegrate and fall away because they don't want to change. I think there'll be people who are in corporate America or corporate anywhere who are going to hold a vibration that will shift those businesses to become more conscious,
mm,
and more ethical. And then I think there'll be new business structures and things that are going to be developed by people who have been doing this work. So, I think like I see you as one of those women who are like, whether you create your own business moving forward or whether you're going to another corporate job, like you're going to be one of those women who is changing that structure.
yeah, I think that two things based off what you said. First of all, if you want to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to find me. And I will respond to all messages. So please feel free to do that. The second thing, it's unfortunate that they're making a lot of changes in government right now that are taking away the rights that we as women had protected from a business perspective. They're taking away our right to sue for discrimination, which a lot of companies are going to take advantage of, and they are going to. It's like we're going back to early 70s. So we are going to have to start this fight all over again. And we have to have the passion to do that. And this time we've become almost, it's awkward to say, but it almost like complacent because we had those laws protecting us. And now we no longer have those laws protecting us anymore. So they don't feel like they have to hire us. Even if they're most qualified, if they're misogynistic, they're still not going to hire us, even
Yeah.
if we're more qualified. So we have to fight more. We have to look out for each other. And we have to make sure that we say, no, we're
Yep.
not accepting this.
And we have to create the businesses that are like,
Exactly.
oh, you're going to be that kind of business. Well, I'm going to take you down by creating this business, and we're going to do what you're doing even better.
Exactly.
We're going to take all of your customers, clients, and we're going to do it better because, like, F you. Like, and I think, like, even when it comes to like sexual harassment and stuff, I think women need to learn how to fight, like, that's why I call myself a wise warrior because, I have my black belt in Kung Fu. When you know how to handle yourself, it's like, you're not going to do anything to me. You're going to touch me, you're going to break your hand. Like, simple as that. Like, and we need to be powerful enough. And that's like the inner authority of like,
Yeah.
you can try.
I think all young girls should be put in Krav Maga classes, not only to learn how to fight, but it builds self-confidence, that I got this, and we need to remind, I look at myself because I'm getting older. I have to remind younger generations, though, you never thought it was your fight. Now it's your fight.
And it's
Now
always been our fight because even with all these laws, men were still doing shit. Like, I was with my friend Kristen, I was at this networking event yesterday, and like these women in academia were being sexually harassed and stuff. It's like, in academia? What?
yeah,
Like, and it's like, we need to, like, fuck being liked, fuck being like, oh, we might rock the boat. We need to rock the boat. We
we
need to
absolutely
knock
do.
it over, and know that we can swim.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And we need to make sure not just our current generations, but future generations are prepared and protected, so that we will never go back to a time where we are property.
Yep. And we need to teach our children, especially like both our female kids and our male kids,
Male
like,
kids.
how to be, like the value of women. Like, that's also part of my passion. Like, I've been doing so much research and like I'm reading the Ethiopian Bible, and I'm like looking at like all these stories, and what is what did these words originally mean in ancient Hebrew, ancient Aramaic, ancient Sumerian, and like the Mesopotamian stories? Like, what are the true, like, what's the true meaning of things? And then, like, how do we change those stories? Because even like, yeah, and this isn't like, I truly believe that there is a God. There's like an energy, a source. But I think that so much of the Bible is stuff that is, it's stories that they want us to believe to control and manipulate us.
Yes, it is.
And we, believe them to be true, and so they become self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yeah, especially about women,
Hmm.
particularly about women. One of the things, I'm most proud of in my life is my kids. They're both boys. My oldest is 24, my youngest is 19. I'm exceptionally proud at how uh, active they are in, you know, getting involved in society to protect uh, marginalized people's rights, whether that's women, whether that's African American, whether that's the LGBTQ community. They're passionate about their causes. And I think that's the thing that I'm most proud of in life. I've accomplished an incredible amount in business, and I'm very proud of those accomplishments. I like breaking the glass ceiling. I like being the first one there to do it. But knowing that I've raised a generation that will hopefully make changes is something that I'm most proud of.
Amen. All right. Well, we're at the hour. Is there any like last words of wisdom that you want to share with people?
I think that the most important thing that I want to tell people is, we talk about people being people pleasers all the time and wanting to be liked. And the best piece of advice that I can give someone is most of the people that you or interact with in your life don't know you well enough to like you or dislike you. So stop caring. Care about the people that are important to you. Their opinions matter. Nobody else's really does. And that includes people you work for. They don't know you well enough to like you or dislike you. Just get the job done.
Amen. Thank you so much for being here. And
Welcome.
to continue to break the glass ceiling and break the glass ceiling on all the oppressive systems. Uh,
I'll keep trying.
yeah. Inspire the next generation to do the same. So
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll put like your LinkedIn information in the comments, and then on YouTube, like I'll put that in the description if anybody wants to reach out to you. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.